And then there's the issue of how our bodies respond to protein depending on our insulin sensitivity. And I had a great talk with Professor Ben Bickman, who likes to talk about research from Dr. Cahill and others, showing that our insulin and glucagon ratio and our insulin response to protein is very different depending on our baseline metabolic health and insulin sensitivity. So do you see any concerns in someone who is fairly insulin resistant at baseline, fighting with metabolic syndrome, who hasn't really gotten a handle on it yet, eating too much protein then because of the insulinogenic response from it?
No, I actually have bigger concerns about that person eating unrestricted amounts of fat, because they've clearly run out of adipocyte storage, and that's why they're insulin resistant. So you really don't have any place to put fat if you're severely insulin resistant. And what we often do in the hospital, as you know, prior to bariatric surgery, for example, we'll put someone on a protein-sparing modified fast where they're eating nothing but protein and just restricting non-protein energy. And these people typically lose a ton of weight really rapidly, and their insulin sensitivity dramatically improves, even though they're just eating a bunch of protein. Yeah. So I actually think that's optimal. I think if you're insulin resistant, you're clearly internally over fat, and you don't have a lot of room to store any kind of energy, glucose or fat. And in that setting, you might want to just eat protein, a la the medical protein-sparing modified fast. I've seen patients do that and have pretty good results. So I don't think, I'm not saying it's optimal to just eat protein, but I'm saying that I don't think it's actively bad. I would have no concerns about that.
Interesting. The definition of insulin resistance can get so complicated, especially differentiating insulin resistance and hyperinsulinemia. But I think there's a physiological state where you're insulin resistant in the muscle cells and the liver, but not in the fat cells. So you're still storing plenty of fat. Insulin's working there. You're preventing lipolysis. You're increasing fat storage, but you're sort of peripherally insulin resistant. And I wonder if that would be different, because you said when you're insulin resistant, you have nowhere else to put fat, but there are clearly people who are getting fatter and insulin resistant. So I wonder if there's a differentiation we need to draw there about defining insulin resistance better, rather than just using one, blanket term of insulin resistance.
Right, absolutely. And the reality is that your other tissues get insulin resistant before your fat cells do. Yeah. And the reality is that insulin resistance is this worst case scenario where anything bad you could get from insulin you're getting, and nothing good. And so I agree with that. But even in that setting, I don't see eating protein as being a problem. I would still be more concerned about non-protein energy.
Okay, interesting. And now some of the other benefits about protein, we talked about preventing sarcopenia and maintaining lean muscle mass, but people have this concept that as long as I'm eating protein, I'm going to gain muscle. Is it that simple?
It actually is that simple if you were on a low protein diet. Like, there are numerous studies where people were given a higher amount of protein in their diet and literally gained lean mass just sitting on the couch.
Really?
Like, literally, you will increase your lean mass by just eating more protein, especially initially if you're coming from a lower protein diet, which is very interesting.
Yeah, that is really interesting.
여기서 테드 박사가 언급한 단백질 보존 변형 단식은 실제 병원에서도 활용되는 체중 감량 전략입니다. 이 방법은 말 그대로 필수 단백질은 충분히 공급하면서 지방과 탄수화물 등 다른 에너지원은 극단적으로 제한하는 다이어트입니다. 쉽게 말해 근육은 최대한 지키면서 저장된 지방을 주 에너지원으로 쓰게 만드는 전략이죠. 주로 고도비만 환자의 수면 무호흡증, 관절 질환의 증상을 줄이고 수술의 위험도를 낮추기 위한 목적으로 단기간 빠른 감량을 해야 하는 경우에 사용됩니다. 하지만 이 방법을 일반인에게 그대로 적용하기에는 어려움이 있는데요. 800칼로리 이하의 극단적인 저칼로리 식단이기 때문에 일상생활에 지장을 줄 수 있고 지속하기 어려운 단기 전략이라는 한계점이 있습니다. 국내에서 큰 인기를 끌고 있는 박용우 박사의 스위치온 다이어트는 바로 이 단백질 보존 변형 단식의 핵심 원리를 바탕으로 개발된 프로그램입니다. 스위치온 다이어트는 충분한 단백질 섭취는 그대로 유지하면서 극단적 제한 대신 지속 가능한 방식으로 재설계된 현실적인 저탄수화물 고단백 식단이라 할 수 있습니다. 단백질을 충분히 섭취하면 신체는 스스로 회복을 위한 방향으로 반응합니다. 특히 만성적인 단백질 결핍 상태인 사람은 단백질 섭취를 늘리기만 해도 제지방이 늘고 대사가 개선되는 변화가 일어날 수 있습니다. 하지만 여기서 오해는 하지 마세요. 단백질만 먹어도 제지방이 늘었다는 테드 박사의 설명은 단백질이 부족했던 경우에 한해 나타날 수 있는 회복 반응이지 단백질만 많이 먹으면 누구나 쉽게 근육이 생긴다는 뜻이 아닙니다. 이 발언은 단백질이 회복과 신체 기능 유지에 얼마나 중요한 영양소인지를 강조하는 맥락에서 이해하시면 좋겠습니다. 이제 인터뷰는 단백질이 주는 또 하나의 이점, 바로 포만감에 관한 이야기로 넘어갑니다.
And then there's also the concept of satiety and feeling full and less hungry. And a lot of the people in the low carb and keto world talk about fat. You eat your fat to suppress your hunger. But there are actually some studies showing that if you go from 15 to 30% of your calories from protein, you dramatically reduce your appetite and increase your satiety. So if you were going to, and again, I almost hate talking about macros because we don't eat protein, we don't eat fat, we eat food, and it's a combination of both. But if you were going to put your finger on one macro or one specific area that hits satiety the best, would you pick protein?
Well, okay, first of all, we know that protein is far more satiating than carbs or fats in everybody, lean and obese. I mean, this is basically a medical fact. So protein provides the most satiety. And we also have studies in a low-carb setting showing that 30% protein destroys 15% protein for everything: hunger, body composition, satiety, triglycerides, insulin, HDL, anything you can measure. 30% protein is better than 15% protein, even in a very low carb setting. So I love like 30% protein diets. I mean, this is kind of, hunter-gatherer diet territory, and I like to look at everything diet through an evolutionary lens. So if I had to pick a percent for everyone to be eating, it would probably be 30% protein. Now, if you're not eating any carbohydrates, that's roughly equal grams of protein and fat. That would be 1 to 1 grams of protein and fat. Foods that are 1 to 1 grams of protein and fat would be eggs, would be ribeye steak. So basically your steak and eggs region is kind of a 30% protein diet. And I love that. And I love that so much more than some keto diets that are 10% protein and 90% fat. I have just a big problem with those diets.
대부분 테드 네이먼 박사가 말한 영양소 비율에 관해 이해하셨겠지만 단백질과 지방을 1대1로 먹는데 어떻게 단백질 비율이 30%가 되지? 이렇게 헷갈리시는 분도 계실 텐데요. 그래서 이 부분은 간단히 짚고 넘어갈게요. 우리가 흔히 음식의 비율을 이야기할 때 무게 기준과 칼로리 기준이 다르다는 점을 기억하셔야 합니다. 예를 들어 탄수화물과 단백질은 1g당 4칼로리이고 지방은 g당 9칼로리로 같은 무게를 먹는다면 지방이 훨씬 더 많은 열량을 가지고 있습니다. 그래서 단백질 100g, 지방 100g, 즉 1대1의 무게 비율로 식사하면 총 열량은 1300칼로리고 이 중 단백질은 400칼로리, 즉 약 30%가 됩니다. 이 계산은 처음에는 복잡해 보일 수 있지만 너무 세세하게 매달릴 필요는 없습니다. 자연적인 식품은 정확한 측정이 사실상 불가능하기도 하고 대략적인 계산으로도 충분히 좋은 결과를 얻을 수 있습니다. 예를 들어 스테이크와 달걀, 삼겹살, 고등어 같은 음식은 단백질과 지방 균형이 적절하니 굳이 지방을 더할 필요가 없겠죠. 그러나 새우, 오징어, 닭가슴살 같이 지방이 거의 없는 단백질 식품은 버터나 올리브유를 곁들여 주시는 것이 좋습니다. 이 실천 방식을 구조한 것이 바로 테드 네이먼 박사의 PE다이어트입니다. PE는 프로틴 투 에너지 레시오의 약자로 단백질을 제외한 탄수화물과 지방을 모두 에너지로 보고 단백질의 비율을 칼로리 기준 30% 수준으로 높이자는 접근법입니다. 이 방식은 충분한 포만감을 느끼며 식단을 할 수 있고 칼로리 대비 영양 밀도를 높여 체중 감량 시 떨어지기 쉬운 근육량과 대사 기능을 유지할 수 있습니다.
Now, what if someone's doing well, though? Someone feels better, they're reversing their diabetes, they're losing weight, and their markers are improving. Do you still have sort of theoretical longer-term concerns, or do you think as long as all their markers are improving and they're feeling well, okay, it works for them, I just wouldn't recommend it blanketly for everybody?
Oh, no, I can't argue with success.
Yeah.
If someone's doing well, that's great. I have patients who are very successful on extremely high carb, low fat diets as well.
Yeah.
And if it works for you, I really can't argue with it.
Yeah. So again, sort of a bimodal distribution. So with the energy source, if you're having a very low fat, higher carbohydrate diet, there are some reports that those people can be metabolically healthy, which sort of is completely contrary to everything we talk about in a low carb, high fat world. So how do you explain that?
Oh, it's pretty easy. It's carbs and fats together that are the problem.
Yeah.
Right? So if you go low one or the other, you're going to be fine. Low carb works great. Low fat works for some people, usually people who are started out thin.
Right.
low carb and low fat and high protein works spectacularly well for all your bodybuilders and your bikini models and your aesthetic athletes out there.
Yeah.
So you go low in one of those two and you're pretty much okay.
Yeah.
And that's how it works. And then we know that the combination of the two is what's really driving the obesity epidemic. It's carbs and fats together. This is a huge dopamine reward in your brain. And so all your obesogenic foods are high in carb and fat together. It's your donuts, it's your cookies, it's your muffins, it's your basically your baked potato with butter and your bagel with cream cheese and your candy bars and it's this combination that's bad. So if you can get either one really low, you're home free. Of course, I prefer low carb approach, but that's how these higher carb diets are working.
Yeah, interesting though how the baseline metabolic health is going to have a big impact though on who can actually get away with the higher carb, low fat.
Exactly. So if you're thin to begin with, low fat is going to work great for you because most body fat comes from dietary fat. So if you're just not eating fat, you'll stay thin. On the flip side, if you're fat to begin with, you're going to be much better off with a low carb approach because carbohydrate displaces fat oxidation so much. So if you have a bunch of fat you want to burn, you really want to get the carbs low. So I agree with you. It kind of depends on your starting point.
Yeah, and quality of carbs as well, because if you're following a high carb, low fat diet, but it's still refined carbs or high fructose, I think you're still going to run into trouble. So quality does still matter. I think it's important to emphasize.
Right.
저는 테드 네이먼 박사의 이런 유연한 접근이 정말 마음에 듭니다. 그는 자신이 개발한 식단이 유일무이한 성공 방식이라고 주장하지 않습니다. 오히려 다른 방식으로도 충분히 효과를 볼 수 있고 왜 그런 결과가 나왔는지 객관적으로 설명합니다. 이렇게 여러분은 특정 식단에 너무 얽매일 필요가 없습니다. 식단은 일종의 도구일 뿐 종교처럼 맹목적으로 따라야 할 규칙이 아니니까요. 예를 들어 채식의 이점을 가져가면서 동시에 케토시스의 대사 상태를 활용하는 비건 키토라는 것도 있고, 키토 식단을 하면서 운동 전후로는 탄수화물을 전략적으로 섭취하는 타겟 키토제닉 다이어트 같은 방식도 있습니다. 이런 식단은 엄격한 키토를 추구하는 사람들에게는 해괴망측한 돌연변이 식단으로 보일 수 있겠지만 많은 사람들이 이런 방식으로도 건강한 변화를 경험하고 있습니다. 차후 이런 식단들을 소개하는 영상도 한번 만들어 볼게요. 그리고 테드 박사의 탄수화물과 지방을 함께 먹지 말라는 조언은 실생활에서 바로 실천할 수 있는 정말 유용한 꿀팁입니다. 물론 탄수화물과 지방은 우리 몸에 다른 방식으로 작용하지만 공통점은 둘 다 에너지원이라는 거예요. 그래서 이 두 가지를 동시에 먹으면 우리 몸은 필요 이상의 에너지를 공급받는 셈이고 결국 남은 에너지는 지방으로 저장되어 쉽게 살이 찝니다. 또 한 가지 함정은 탄수화물과 지방 조합은 정말 끝내주게 맛있다는 점입니다. 우리가 마트에서 구입할 수 있는 가공식품이나 시켜먹는 배달 음식은 대부분 탄수화물과 지방의 조합입니다. 이런 음식은 뇌의 보상 시스템을 최대한 자극하기 때문에 한번 먹기 시작하면 쉽게 멈추기 어렵습니다. 이 둘을 매번 분리해서 먹는 게 쉽지는 않지만 둘 중 한 가지만 줄인다면 쉽게 살이 찌지 않을 거예요. 탄수화물 비중을 줄이고 지방 섭취를 늘린 키토 다이어트, 반대로 극도의 저지방식을 하는 보디빌더 식단이 모두 효과적인 이유가 바로 여기에 있습니다. 이 사진 본 적 있으시죠? 옛날에는 고봉밥이라고 해서 밥 한 공기가 지금보다 훨씬 컸다고 해요. 현대인의 눈으로 보면 당뇨에 비만을 유발하는 식단처럼 보이지만 그 시절 사람들은 비만하지도 않았고 당뇨도 거의 없었습니다. 그 이유는 밥만 많이 먹을 뿐 반찬이 부실해서 단백질과 지방 등 다른 영양소는 부족했기 때문입니다. 이렇게 보면 결국 우리가 다이어트를 할 때 집중해야 할 건 칼로리가 아니라 영양소 조합인 것 같습니다. 테드 박사의 말처럼 마른 체형을 가진 사람에겐 고탄수 저지방 식단도 잘 맞을 수 있지만 이미 체지방이 많이 쌓인 상태라면 탄수화물을 줄이는 쪽이 훨씬 유리하겠죠. 자, 인터뷰는 이제 더 흥미로운 주제로 이어집니다.
So how about, okay, so let's get back to protein here for a second. The quality of protein, because you see all sorts of arguments about plant protein versus animal protein. So assuming we can agree on the amount of protein we require, how about the quality and the source of protein of where it's coming from? Do you see a big differentiation there?
I sure do. And here's how it works. All of these proteins are broken down into amino acids before they're even absorbed. So on some level, you're getting the same amino acids either way. And so why should it even matter? Who cares, right? But the reality is that plant foods are different than animal foods, and they have a different composition of amino acids, and they're less complete for animal health. You know what I mean? So like leucine, lysine, methionine, tryptophan, some of these crucial amino acids that your body really needs and is really looking for from your diet are much lower in plant foods than in animal foods. So it's just a medical fact that you have to eat more of a plant protein to get the same amount of a full amino acid profile that you get from animal foods. And this is really well known. Like if you're a bodybuilder, for example, and you're getting protein from pea protein or rice protein or hemp protein or one of these plant-based sources, everybody knows that you have to eat about 30 or 40% more to get all the amino acids you need to build muscle that you get from whey protein or egg white protein or some sort of animal-based protein. So there's definitely higher quality to animal proteins. And that's if you're looking at just a pure protein. Then there's also absorbability. So a lot of the plant proteins are locked up in this fiber matrix, and some of it's not getting absorbed. And so you've got bioavailability in the GI tract, and then you've got incomplete profile of amino acids. So the animal foods are crushing the plant foods.
Yeah, so obviously people survive as vegans, and there are plenty of vegan athletes who are doing very well. So it's not that they can't get it. It's just they're going to have to work harder, eat more calories, and not have as bioavailable protein to get the same amount. So they're going to have to just increase more carbs and more calories that go along for the ride to get the same amount of protein.
Correct. And actually, not very many people know this, but a super, super low protein diet will actually give you a whole new level of leanness, just because the cost of weight gain goes up exponentially as protein goes down. So if you can get your protein intake down below maybe 5% a day, you're very, very lean because your body can't afford to build any kind of mass at all. Unfortunately, and this is how like the 30 bananas a day diet work. Your fruitarian diet, it might be 5% protein. Your potato hack is very low in protein. You're going to actually lose weight and get thinner, but a lot of what you're losing is lean mass. And so you're literally going to have lighter organs. Your brain's going to be lighter. Your bone, of course, and bone and muscle is going to be way lighter. So there's this like extreme low protein approach that you typically see in the vegan world, like the McDougall starch solution. And this is, extremely high carb, but it's very low fat and it's very low protein. And it works, quote unquote, for just weight loss. But I don't know if you really want the osteopenia and the sarcopenia that is definitely going to come along with that.
Yeah, perfect example of how weight, what the scale says, and weight loss is not necessarily the same as health.
Right.
And interestingly, there are some prominent vegans who have said, yeah, you can lose weight with heroin and cocaine, but I'm not going to recommend that to my patients. And they do that. They say that in reference to low carb diets, but it seems like they should probably be saying that in reference to this very low protein diet.
Exactamundo. Yes, exactly. I totally agree.
Yeah, very interesting. And then, of course, the nutrients that come along with the different sources of protein. Higher nutrient availability in the animal proteins compared to the plant proteins. Again, not that you can't get them, but things like vitamin D and B12 and even heme iron and zinc and, of course, DHA. I mean, all of those are really fairly deficient in plant proteins, aren't they?
Absolutely. And the reality is you need, at least 25 elements and minerals to run your body and be healthy. And plants are absorbing these minerals from the soil, but they're limited as to how far their roots can reach. So they'll absorb a certain amount of minerals. But animals go around and eat a bunch of different plants, and they bioaccumulate minerals. They bioaccumulate and biomagnify nitrogen and minerals. So as you go up the food chain, as you go up the trophic levels from plants to herbivores to carnivores, you see higher and higher bioaccumulation and concentration of micronutrients like minerals and nitrogen and protein. And the reality is the higher you go up the food chain, the higher the nutrient density of the food you're eating. It's just a scientific fact. That's why animal foods are always higher in protein and micronutrient density than plant foods, period.
Yeah, it makes sense.
테드 박사의 말처럼 식물성 단백질은 동물성 단백질에 비해 품질 면에서 확실히 열세입니다. 필수 아미노산이 부족하고 흡수율도 낮고 생체 이용률에서도 차이가 나죠. 요즘은 편의점이나 마트만 가도 프로테인이라는 이름을 내세워 건강에 좋다는 식으로 홍보하는 가공식품을 흔히 볼 수 있는데요. 아이러니하게도 이런 제품에 가장 많이 사용되는 원료가 바로 이 식물성 단백질입니다. 이유는 단순한데요. 일단 값이 쌉니다. 그래서 단백질의 질과 상관없이 적은 비용으로 단백질이 몇 그램이나 들어있다고 광고하기 좋죠. 두 번째는 식물성이라는 단어 자체가 주는 긍정적인 이미지 때문입니다. 식물성 하면 뭔가 건강하고 가볍고 착한 느낌을 주잖아요. 품질은 떨어져도 제품 포장에는 건강식처럼 포장되기 딱 좋습니다. 요즘은 단백질이라는 단어가 영양소가 아니라 마치 마케팅 용어처럼 쓰이고 있어요. 포장지에 프로틴 몇 그램 이렇게 써 있으면 왠지 건강한 것처럼 보이니까요. 물론 그런 제품이 단백질이 전혀 없는 밀가루, 식용유만으로 만든 가공식품보다는 조금 더 나은 선택일 수는 있습니다. 하지만 포장지에 표시되는 단백질 함량만으로 그 제품을 판단하지 말고 성분표를 꼭 한번 살펴보는 습관이 필요합니다. 포장지 앞면엔 큼지막하게 고단백이라고 적혀 있어도 원재료를 보면 분리대두단백, 두류 가공품 등으로 적혀 있는 경우가 많습니다. 이건 테드 박사의 말대로 필수 아미노산 구성이 불완전한 식물성 단백질이죠. 이런 음식들로 단백질을 채운다면 아무리 많이 먹어도 우리가 기대하는 효과, 즉 근육 합성이나 회복 효과를 보기 어려울 것입니다. 그래서 저는 단백질을 먹을 땐 양뿐만 아니라 품질도 꼭 함께 고려해야 한다고 생각합니다. 특히 요즘처럼 고단백이라는 포장 문구가 넘쳐나는 시대에는 더더욱이요. 그리고 되도록이면 포장된 가공식품이 아니라 고기, 생선처럼 자연적인 식품을 통해 단백질을 섭취하는 게 건강에는 훨씬 이롭겠죠.
So another thing that's gotten popular lately talking about protein is collagen, sort of like a certain specific, very specific type of protein. So much so that people are recommending collagen pills and collagen supplements. And where do you stand on the subject of collagen and how that fits into a healthy nutritional pattern?
I love nose to tail eating because it makes sense to me from an evolutionary perspective.